you think of chocolate, you think of Hershey's. The company is one of the largest on the planet, and not just in the candy industry. Hershey is currently worth an unbelievable $54 billion and is continuing to make more money every day. But who started this incredible chocolate and candy empire? Most people have no idea that a poor 12-year-old boy who dropped out of school created Hershey and everything it has become. On September 13, 1857, Milton Hershey was born in Derry Township, Pennsylvania, to Fanny Snavely and Henry Hershey. His father, Henry, was born into a middle-class family, as was his mother, Fanny. But Henry wasn't successful in his business ventures, and their family was extremely poor. They worked as farmers trying to make ends meet, and while Henry continued to attempt entrepreneurial schemes, one after another, they failed miserably. So only 3 years after Milton was born, Henry moved their family to Oil City in the hopes of making money on oil like everyone else. But once again, Henry's plan failed. And while they were essentially living in squalor, Fanny was pregnant with their second child and demanded they move away from Oil City. Her brothers arrived from their family farm and tried to persuade Henry to take Fanny and Milton back to the farm. Henry didn't want to give up on his dream of making millions in the oil industry, but as he had no more money to invest in the venture and his wife was desperate to leave, they packed up and followed her brothers back to Dauphin County, where their family farm was to start over once again with nothing. Throughout this time, life was extremely challenging for Milton. Because of their poverty, he was small and undernourished. When he finally did start attending school, young Milton couldn't focus enough to learn and could barely read. His life changed once again when his uncles decided to give his father a farm of his own, in the hopes that it would drop these far-fetched schemes and simply be able to provide for his wife and now 2 children, Milton and Serena. However, it did not work. Henry continued with his get-rich-quick ideas and left Fanny to run the farm and the household itself. It was a real struggle, and young Milton was forced to drop out of school at only 12 years old and help his mother in order to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. During this time, Serena died from scarlet fever, and his family life became worse than ever. Milton then started looking for work, and his father got him a job at a print shop, but he was fired after a few months. Then his aunt got him a job in a local candy shop with local businessman Joseph Royer. This was the first job in Milton's young life that he had been excited about. What kind wouldn't want to work in a candy shop? But while his enthusiasm was appreciated by Royer, it was his hard work that ended up paying off. Over the next few years, Milton learned a great deal about running a candy shop, including how to buy ingredients and make ice cream and various sweet treats. After learning everything he could from Royer, Milton's mother and aunt encouraged him to open his own candy shop. Even though Milton had saved very little from his time as an apprentice, his aunt offered to loan him the money needed to start his new business venture. In 1876, his store was officially opened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and much to everyone's excitement, it was immediately successful. In fact, within only a few years of opening his doors, he moved the shop to a larger storefront. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Sugar became extremely expensive, and the American economy was struggling. He took out a loan from his uncles to stay afloat, but it wasn't enough. He also needed to cut down costs and started selling just one product: candy. Milton started doing well again and invested yet again in a larger store. But sadly for Milton, things took a downward turn again when his father came to the city and asked Milton to go into business with him. Even though Milton knew his father was a terrible businessman and full of bad ideas, he couldn't turn him down. Milton used much of the shop's money to help his father and essentially lost everything. At that time, he also suffered from mental health issues due to the stress of trying to run several failing businesses. It was one of the worst times in his life. In 1882, he filed for bankruptcy. With no money and no business, Milton felt completely lost. He decided to follow his father to Denver, Colorado, in the hopes of starting fresh, but the economy was in turmoil, and he struggled to find work doing absolutely anything he could. Luckily, he ended up getting a job as a candy maker in a downtown confectionery shop. However, Milton didn't stay there long. What he really wanted was to open his own store again, so he headed back east, borrowed even more money from his aunt, and moved to New York City. Once again, he started working at a candy shop in the hopes of making enough money to open his own shop in the city. And just a year later, he did exactly that. While in Denver, Milton had created a new recipe for caramels that no one else was using, and when he started selling them in his shop in New York, people went crazy for them. It seemed as though Milton was finally going to make it big, but his father showed up again, asking for money. Milton was in debt once again and was forced to file for bankruptcy. Milton was defeated and moved back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He borrowed more money from his accountant and opened up yet another candy store. This time, he focused solely on manufacturing his famous caramels and selling them out of a wheelbarrow around the county. When he made a large sale to an Englishman who traveled through and tried his caramels, Milton could finally pay off all his debts, and it seemed he was finally in the clear and could breathe easily for the first time in years. From then on, Milton started selling his caramels all over the world, and he became one of the state's most successful and important businessmen. He had a large team of employees and a successful business, but Milton didn't stop there. He learned about a chocolate factory in Germany that was mass-producing chocolate to keep costs down. Milton decided that he wanted to do the same and make chocolate for the masses in the United States. At the time, chocolate was dark, bitter, and had a grainy texture. And at that, it was expensive and considered a luxury. The Germans had figured out a way to make cost-efficient, smooth, sweet milk chocolate, and Milton just needed to learn how they did so to make some himself. So he purchased the German equipment and started making Hershey chocolates in Lancaster. Milton had finally started creating his empire. He bought several factories with the money he made from selling his caramel business for an amazing $1 million. Although no one knew it yet, the Hershey Chocolate Company would eventually become the largest candy company on the planet. But before that could happen, Milton needed to nail down his recipe, which proved to be more challenging than he had predicted. In 1903, Milton hired John Schmalbach to help him create the perfect milk chocolate, and after several failed attempts, they finally figured it out. Their chocolate was delicious, easy to make, quick setting, and lasted months instead of a few days. In their first year of milk chocolate bar production in 1905, the Hershey Chocolate Company reached over $1 million in sales. And luckily, it didn't stop there. By 1907, he had several chocolate products, including Hershey's Kisses and chocolate-covered almonds, and was making millions every year. Milton certainly knew what he was doing when it came to making delicious chocolates. But in order to keep his prices low enough for the general public to be able to afford, he created a business model that would ensure his prices stayed low and his business profitable. He would make huge quantities of only a few products. Every shop in America was stocking Hershey's affordable chocolates, and within only a few more years, Hershey was officially the largest chocolate company in the world. Sadly, during this immense success, Milton suffered two horrible losses: his father and his wife. As he had no children, he decided to dedicate his life completely to his work. However, as everyone does at some point, Milton decided he needed a vacation and headed to Cuba, where he fell in love with the country. He decided to open a sugarcane plantation and factory to produce his chocolates. It's said that Milton's idea was seen as risky, but Milton was unfazed. He started a huge operation in Cuba and ensured that the local workers were treated extremely well. Milton's factory in Cuba included homes for his workers, an impressive factory, and even a baseball field. Once again, Milton had hit a home run. Over the next few years, the Hershey Company continued to grow in ways Milton could only have dreamed of. He sold millions of chocolate bars to the U.S. Army during the First World War, and with his sugar fields in Cuba, he was able to keep his costs lower than any of his competitors. Throughout the 20th century, Hershey had to compete with dozens of competitors who started making chocolate at affordable prices, just as Milton had done decades before. But Milton kept at it and kept up with the times to ensure his business would stay lucrative through all the ups and downs of war, depression, and other events of the century. During the Great Depression, Milton struggled not only to continue to sell his product, but also to keep his workers employed. However, he worked tirelessly and was able to do both. Although Milton Hershey passed away in 1945, he was able to see his business become the candy empire he had once dreamed it to be. He was considered not only one of the most successful businessmen in the world, but Milton also spent much of his fortune on philanthropy and opened many schools, orphanages, and community centers around the country. Hershey had become a publicly traded company in 1927 and was soon owned by many investors after Milton passed away. Today, the company is certainly one of the biggest and most successful on the planet, taking in billions of dollars in profit every year, and all because of a young boy who dropped out of school and got a job at a local candy shop to help his family survive. Hungry for another fascinating business story? Click on the following video to hear the crazy story about the hotel clerk who created the most luxurious fashion brand in the world.